In the pulsating financial heart of New York, where skyscrapers cast shadows over the bustling streets below, Richard Sterling stepped out of his black car, a luxury model that reflected his status of success. He quickly checked his Rolex, concerned about the time. The meeting he was about to lead was not just any meeting. It was perhaps the most decisive of the month, promising to solidify his position in the company in front of his strategic partners. As he walked with brisk and determined steps toward the imposing glass and steel building that housed his company, Richard was abruptly interrupted. An elderly lady, dressed simply and with a look of concern, approached him. Her silver hair was slightly disheveled by the wind, and she clutched a small purse tightly against her chest. "Sir, please, could you help me?" Her voice was tremulous, laden with a gentle urgency. She extended her hand, as if seeking not just physical assistance but a human connection in a city often indifferent. Richard, whose mind was already anticipating the charts and discussion points of the meeting, barely registered her face. Without slowing his pace, he responded with a coldness that contrasted with the brightness of the sunny day. "Sorry, I don't have time for this now," he said, his voice tinged with evident irritation. The woman recoiled, visibly shaken by the rejection. "But sir, I just need a moment," she insisted, her expression becoming more desperate. Richard, however, was already turning his face away, quickening his pace. "I can't help," he stated, leaving the sentence to float in the cold morning air as he walked away. The elderly lady stood still, watching Richard's figure recede, her reflection mirrored in the shop windows and swallowed by the incessantly flowing crowd. She sighed, a sound almost lost in the hustle and bustle of the city, and slowly walked away, disappearing into the crowd as just another anonymous face in New York. Richard did not look back. The tension of his imminent meeting already recaptured his full attention, pushing the brief encounter to the back of his mind. Yet, that brief and uncomfortable interaction would cast much longer shadows on his conscience than he could have imagined, reverberating through the events that were to unfold in the coming days. He entered the lobby of the building, his steps echoing with authority as he headed to the elevator that would take him directly to the floor of his meeting room, where partners were already beginning to gather, ready to start. Richard entered the conference room, whose glass walls offered a panoramic view of bustling New York, reflecting both the grandeur and the gravity of the occasion. The partners were already in place, dispersed around the oval mahogany table, each with their tablets and papers meticulously organized. The murmur ceased when Richard took his place at the head of the table, adjusting his glasses and nodding briefly, signaling the start of the meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Today we will discuss our strategic next steps and the innovations that will define our future," began Richard, his voice firm and clear. He proceeded, unrolling a scroll of charts and projections that captured everyone's attention. As he presented, his charisma and command of the numbers turned data into decisions, doubts into strategies. As each slide changed, murmurs of approval grew, punctuated by enthusiastic nods. Thomas, one of the most influential partners, interrupted with a smile. "Richard, your insights are as revolutionary as ever. I'm particularly impressed with the digital expansion proposal. It's exactly what we need to outpace the competition." "Thank you, Thomas. The idea is to stay ahead, not just keep up," Richard replied, pleased with the positive reception. As the meeting neared its end, Richard took one final pause, looking around the room. "Any questions or additional comments before we conclude?" After a few seconds of silence, a collective nod confirmed the consensus. The meeting was concluded with sincere applause, echoing through the room as a harbinger of future successes. Richard, feeling a wave of accomplishment, allowed himself a brief moment of pride. As the partners dispersed, his secretary, Laura, approached with a warm smile. "Richard, that was spectacular. Your presentation was not only informative but truly inspiring," she said, handing him a tablet with summarized notes and the next steps to be documented. "Thank you, Laura. I feel like we are on the right track to something great," Richard responded, his thoughts still partly occupied by the elderly woman from the morning. Despite the palpable success and the accolades, The image of the elderly woman asking for help continued to disturb Richard. He tried to push these thoughts aside as he prepared for the next item on the agenda, a networking cocktail that promised to be as productive as the meeting. Before leaving the room, Richard cast one more look at the city below, his face reflected in the glass beside the skyscrapers that touched the sky. The memory of the woman and her humble request deeply contrasted with the vision of power and success that surrounded him. Determined to keep his focus on business, Richard finally turned away, leaving the conference room and heading toward the elevator. The doors closed behind him, sealing the chapter of a corporate triumph as the city continued, indifferent to the small and large human dramas unfolding in its busy streets. After leaving the formality of the conference room behind, Richard headed to the networking event venue, a modern art gallery illuminated by soft lights that cast a welcoming glow over the displayed artworks. It was a vibrant setting, with subtle background music and lively conversations echoing throughout the expansive space. Business people and creatives from various sectors mingled, wine glasses in hand, discussing everything from the latest market trends to innovations in technology. Richard, still occasionally distracted by thoughts of the elderly woman from the morning, tried to focus on the present, adjusting his name badge as he entered the main hall. He was greeted with smiles and handshakes, his reputation as a shrewd businessman preceding him. Amidst the handshakes and card exchanges, one face in particular caught his attention. Eliza Townsend stood beside one of the art pieces, an abstract painting that seemed to capture both chaos and calm. Dressed elegantly but unpretentiously in a simple dress that highlighted her confident posture, Eliza had a presence that seemed out of place in the corporate environment, an aura of serenity and intellect that set her apart. Intrigued, Richard approached her, initiating a conversation about the artwork before them. "This piece is fascinating, don't you think? It seems like every time you look, something new appears," he commented, hoping to spark her interest. Eliza turned toward him with a smile, her eyes lighting up as she spoke about the art. "Yes, it's true. There's a layer of complexity here that's really appealing. Do you like modern art?" Her voice had a melodic tone that complemented the lightness of her approach. "I must admit, I'm more of a casual admirer than a connoisseur," Richard confessed, impressed by the ease of the conversation. "But I'm always open to learning more. And you, do you work with art?" "Not exactly, but my passion for art and design greatly influences my work. I'm an innovation consultant, helping companies integrate creativity into their strategies," Eliza explained, her enthusiasm making her passion for her work evident. The conversation flowed naturally, with Richard discovering that, in addition to their affinity for art, they shared an interest in travel and literature. The dialogue between them was a refreshing contrast for Richard, so different from the strictly professional interactions to which he was accustomed. Eliza not only shared her ideas but also challenged him with questions that made him reflect. As the evening progressed, Richard felt a genuine connection forming, something rare at events like this. Before they parted, he knew he wanted to see Eliza again. "Would you be interested in having dinner with me one of these days? I would like to continue our conversation about the intersection of art and business," he proposed, hopeful. Eliza considered the invitation with a thoughtful smile. "I would love to," she replied. "It would be a great opportunity to explore some more ideas." With Eliza's contact in hand and a date set, Richard felt that the evening had been surprisingly productive. He left the event with a sense of anticipation, not just for the potential business but for the prospect of getting to know someone he already found fascinating. As he walked out of the gallery, the last traces of the day disappeared on the horizon, and he knew that his encounter with Eliza could be the beginning of something new and exciting. The evening was mild when Richard and Eliza arrived at the chosen restaurant, an elegant establishment known for its fusion cuisine and stunning views of the New York skyline. As they were led to their table, a secluded corner with a panoramic view of the illuminated city, the sophisticated ambience promised a night of enjoyable conversations and culinary discoveries. As they settled in, a discreet waiter approached to present the menu and suggest a wine that would complement their choices. "May I suggest the Chateau Margaux 2015? It pairs excellently with the dishes you're considering," he said, with a knowledge that only enhanced the refined tone of the evening. "Great suggestion, thank you," Richard responded, nodding in agreement. He looked at Eliza, who smiled, clearly appreciating the choice. With their orders placed, the first dish soon arrived, and the conversation between them flowed as smoothly as the wine in their glasses. "So, Richard, tell me more about what brought you here," Eliza began, curious about the motivations and aspirations that shaped Richard's career. He shared stories of his early days, challenges overcome, and the visions he had for the future of his company. Eliza, in turn, talked about her passion for integrating creativity and innovation in business, making Richard see an unusual and stimulating potential in her ideas. As the evening progressed, the conversation took a more personal turn. Eliza hesitated for a moment, her gaze becoming introspective. "Richard, there's something I've been trying to cope with for years, and I rarely talk about it," she began, her voice low and laden with emotion. "My mother disappeared when I was younger. It was an event that drastically changed my life and my family's." The revelation surprised Richard, who slowly set his glass down on the table, completely focused on Eliza. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Eliza. That must have been incredibly difficult," he responded, his voice full of compassion. Eliza nodded, gently pulling a worn photograph from her purse. "This is her," she said, extending the photo to Richard. The moment his eyes fell on the image, his heart seemed to stop. The woman in the photograph was the same elderly lady he had abruptly dismissed that cold morning. The shock of realization hit Richard like a wave. I met this woman," he stammered, his voice almost a whisper. "Eliza, I saw her on the morning before our initial meeting. She asked me for help, and I didn't stop." Eliza looked at Richard, surprise and confusion evident on her face. "You saw her? Where? How was she?" The questions poured out quickly, as concern for her mother suddenly resurged with the possibility of a new beginning for her long search. Consumed by guilt and the urgency to correct his past mistake, Richard felt a determination grow within him. He knew he could not leave this matter unresolved. "Eliza, I will help you find her. It's the least I can do," he promised, his resolution firm in his voice. Grateful yet still shaken by the news, Eliza nodded, a mix of hope and fear passing through her eyes. "Thank you, Richard. This means so much to me." As dinner came to an end and Richard's promise echoed between them, both knew that the night had marked the beginning of an unexpected journey that would extend far beyond the scope of a simple meal. As they left the restaurant, the weight and possibility of this new commitment united them in a way that neither could have anticipated. The night had fallen over the city when Richard, with the promise made to Eliza still echoing in his thoughts, began his search for Margaret. Driven by a mix of guilt and determination, he knew this journey would be both a quest for the elderly woman and an attempt at personal redemption. The next day, armed with a photograph of Margaret and a detailed description provided by Eliza, Richard started his search in the vicinity of the place where he had last encountered Margaret. The neighborhood was known for its mix of new developments and old homes that told stories of generations past. The people milling about were a tapestry of long-time residents and new inhabitants. Richard approached a small bakery, whose owner, a middle-aged man named George, was known for his involvement with the local community. Showing George the photograph of Margaret, Richard asked if he recognized her. With a careful look, George nodded. "Ah, yes, Margaret. A very dear lady. She used to come here every morning for coffee, but it's been a few weeks since I've seen her. Do you know where she lives, or have any idea where she might be now?" Richard asked, the urgency clear in his voice. George scratched his chin, thoughtful. "She mentioned once that she helped out at a community center not too far from here. Maybe they know something about her current whereabouts," he suggested, providing directions to the place. Thanking him, Richard headed to the community center, where he was greeted by a young volunteer named Lisa. Upon seeing the photograph, a smile lit up her face. "Margaret is one of our most beloved volunteers here. She not only helps with activities but also offers a kind word to everyone going through tough times, Lisa said, her eyes shining with admiration. Do you know where I can find her? Richard asked, mentally noting every piece of information. Unfortunately, she hasn't been coming lately, but here is the address where she lives with her sister. I hope this helps, Lisa responded, handing him a piece of paper. With each interaction, Richard's image of Margaret transformed. The woman he had so abruptly dismissed was now emerging as a figure of kindness and respect in the community. Feeling increasingly compelled to correct his mistake, Richard proceeded to the address provided. Arriving at a modest brick house with a small garden in front, he hesitated before climbing the entrance steps. His heart beat with the expectation of facing not only Margaret but also the consequences of his past behavior. Before he could ring the doorbell, a lady opened the door. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at Richard with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I'm looking for Margaret. My name is Richard Sterling, and I need to talk to her about something very important," he began, his voice firm yet laden with a sincerity that he hoped would convey both his remorse and his determination to do what was right. The woman at the door watched him for a long moment before slowly nodding. "I am Margaret's sister, June. Please come in. I'll see if she's available to talk to you." As Richard entered the house, his gaze fell on the photographs on the walls, each telling a story of Margaret's life. He realized he was about to learn much more about the woman he had so hastily judged. Richard's search for Margaret, initially motivated by guilt, was transforming into a journey of discovery and understanding, revealing the layers of a life lived with kindness and impact. As he waited in the modestly decorated living room, he prepared himself for what could be one of the most significant encounters of his life. Sitting in the modestly decorated living room, Richard waited patiently. The walls were adorned with photographs depicting happy moments, and each corner seemed to tell a story of deep human connections, so different from the business world in which he usually operated. As he waited, the minutes seemed to stretch, providing him a rare and tranquil space for reflection. Richard's reflections on his life so far began to take on a deeper, more introspective tone. The search for Margaret not only confronted him with the reality of his past actions, but also forced him to face the type of person he had become. Until that point, his world had revolved around business successes, numbers, and results. However, those walls spoke of a different kind of wealth, a wealth of spirit and human connections. "Richard," the soft voice of June interrupted his thoughts. He looked up and saw Margaret standing at the doorway, leaning on a cane, but with a look that radiated an inner strength belied by her physical frailty. "Margaret, thank you so much for having me," began Richard, rising quickly. "I need to apologize to you. We met one morning, and I was rude to you. I wasn't at my best, and that's no excuse for what I did." Margaret watched him intently, her face expressing a mix of surprise and caution. "I remember you," she said with a voice that carried both the wisdom of years and a dose of kindness. "Life teaches us many lessons, some harder than others. And you, what have you learned from this?" That question made Richard hesitate. He had spent so much time focused on goals and objectives that he rarely allowed himself to think about the legacy he wanted to leave behind, beyond professional successes. "I've learned that the connections we make with people are as important as any success we might achieve. I'm here not just to apologize, but to learn from you, to better understand the empathy and kindness that, from what I've heard, you've always demonstrated." Margaret smiled faintly, motioning for him to sit again. "Empathy is a good start, and kindness is a journey, not a destination," she explained, her eyes shining with a mix of firmness and kindness. "But tell me, Richard, what do you intend to do now, knowing this?" Richard reflected for a moment before responding. "I want to change, Margaret. I want my legacy to be more than business and profits. I want it to be about the people I've helped and the lives I've touched positively." This conversation with Margaret was a turning point for Richard. He left her house not only with the forgiveness he sought, but with a new perspective on what it meant to live a fulfilling life. On the way back, as the city lights twinkled in the distance, Richard felt that he was beginning to truly understand the impact his actions could have. Moved by this new understanding, Richard decided it was time to take concrete actions. He began to plan ways to integrate kindness and social responsibility into the core of his business operations, a plan that would require not just a revision of his business practices, but also a re-evaluation of his daily interactions with those around him. This was the beginning of a new phase in his life, where every decision and action would be informed not just by financial goals, but also by a sincere desire to contribute positively to the world around him. After his transformative meeting with Margaret, Richard returned to work with renewed vigor, determined to incorporate the values of compassion and empathy not just into his personal life, but also into his business practices. He began outlining plans for social responsibility programs and community initiatives when he received a call that took him completely by surprise. The name that appeared on his phone's display was Jack Milton, a name Richard recognized all too well but never expected to see associated with a friendly call. Jack had been a fierce rival in the business world, known for his aggressive tactics and a particularly intense dispute that had occurred between their companies years ago. "Richard, it's Jack Milton. I've heard you're trying to make some changes, not just in business but personally as well. We need to talk." Jack's voice was calm but carried a weight that indicated this was no ordinary call. Curious and cautious, Richard agreed to meet Jack at a neutral cafe, away from the curious eyes of their respective offices. Sitting face to face, the initial tension quickly gave way to a surprisingly frank conversation. "Richard, I've heard through the grapevine about your search to find that lady, Margaret, and about your attempts to change the direction of your actions and your company," Jack began, watching Richard attentively. "I've also gone through some reflections, let's say. The competition between us has always been fierce, but I've started to see that there's more to life than just winning at all costs." Richard, somewhat shocked by Jack's openness, felt his defenses lower slightly. "This is quite unexpected, Jack. I am trying to make a difference, yes. But how did you know about Margaret?" Jack smiled, a gesture that seemed rare and genuine. "The business world is small, and news travels fast. Moreover, I have my contacts. Which leads me to the main point. I have some resources and contacts that can help you in this search. There's a network of support centers and social services I've started collaborating with recently, and they could be useful." Richard was stunned, not just by the offer, but by the evident change in Jack. That would be incredible, Jack. Honestly, I didn't expect this from you, given our history. Let's just say we all have our moments of revelation, Richard. And helping someone, helping you in this case, is part of my path now, Jack explained, handing Richard a card with contact information. "Use these resources as you see fit, and perhaps we can talk about other ways to collaborate in the future." Grateful and still somewhat incredulous, Richard shook Jack's hand, feeling that both had set aside old rivalries in favor of a greater purpose. As they parted ways, Richard felt a renewed hope not just in finding Margaret, but in seeing that people really could change for the better. Armed with new resources and an unexpected sense of community, Richard began contacting the help centers and social services suggested by Jack. Each call and each meeting expanded his support network and brought him closer to his goal, transforming his personal quest into a mission shared by many. As the search for Margaret intensified, Richard prepared for discoveries not only about Margaret's whereabouts but also about the many ways in which kindness and generosity can manifest, even in the most unexpected places. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Richard as he navigated through an expanding network of contacts and information, each bringing him a step closer to Margaret. With the help of NGOs and resources provided by Jack, he finally received a promising lead from a social worker named Marianne. She contacted Richard with news of an elderly woman matching Margaret's description who had been seen frequently at a small community center on the outskirts of the city. "Richard, I think we've found who you're looking for," Marianne said over the phone, her voice laden with cautious optimism. "She's been participating in a program here at the center. Why don't you come take a look personally?" Filled with hope, Richard drove to the indicated community center. It was a modest building, painted in a soft blue, with well-maintained gardens that added a sense of tranquility to the place. Upon entering, he was greeted by Marianne, who led him down a hallway adorned with drawings and photographs of community events. In the main hall, a group of seniors was engaged in a craft activity. Among them, a woman with silver hair and a focused expression caught his attention. It was Margaret. Richard felt a mix of relief and anxiety upon seeing her, realizing how frail she appeared compared to the strong woman depicted in Eliza's photos. "Margaret," Richard called, approaching slowly. She looked up, and for a moment, a shadow of confusion crossed her face. "Yes. Can I help you?" Her voice was gentle, but there was an underlying caution, an effect of her condition. "Margaret, my name is Richard Sterling. We met a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if you remember," he began, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible so as not to overwhelm her. Margaret watched him for a long moment, her eyes attempting to find recognition that her mind struggled to provide. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't remember you. My memory isn't what it used to be," she said, a soft sadness tinting her words. Richard nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "That's understandable, Margaret. I came because I heard you might be in need of help. And there's someone very special who has been looking for you for a long time," he explained, referring to Eliza. "Eliza, my daughter." The mention of the name seemed to ignite a small beacon of recognition in Margaret's eyes. "Oh, I've thought a lot about her. Margaret, Eliza is well, but she misses you very much and wants to see you. I can help bring you two together if you're willing," Richard offered, observing as the idea seemed to settle with her. Margaret, with Marianne's help, agreed to meet with Eliza, the emotion clear in her voice. "I would love to see my daughter again. Please bring her to me." Coordinating the details with Marianne and ensuring that Margaret was comfortable and received all the necessary support, Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He left the community center not only with the certainty of having found Margaret, but also with renewed hope that he could correct one of the mistakes of the past and perhaps bring some comfort to two souls who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control. As Richard drove back to inform Eliza about the success of his mission, he reflected on the many turns his life had taken in the past few weeks. The journey to find Margaret had been one that changed not only her life and Eliza's, but his own as well, teaching him the invaluable worth of empathy and human care. The day of the reunion between Eliza and Margaret was charged with emotion and expectation. Richard had arranged everything carefully, choosing a quiet spot in the same community center where he had found Margaret. The space was softly lit, with comfortable sofas and a welcoming atmosphere that favored such an intimate and significant moment. Eliza arrived accompanied by Richard, her hands trembling slightly, a mix of nervousness and anticipation clearly visible in her eyes. As she entered the space reserved for the meeting, her gaze swept the room until it landed on Margaret, who was sitting, waiting with an expression of anticipation. "Mom." Eliza's voice cracked a bit with emotion. Margaret looked up, and upon seeing Eliza, a slow smile spread across her face. "Eliza, my dear," she murmured, her words laden with affection and a hint of disbelief. She stood up with some difficulty, supported by her cane. Eliza did not hesitate. She quickly approached, enveloping her mother in a tight hug. "I've missed you so much, Mom," she whispered, tears beginning to form in the corners of her eyes. Margaret caressed Eliza's back, a gesture of comfort. "Me too, my daughter. Me too." Her voice was gentle, though marked by emotion. Richard watched from a distance, allowing them privacy while witnessing the powerful reunion. Seeing the two finally together, after all the effort and obstacles, brought a sense of accomplishment he rarely experienced in his finance-focused career. After a few minutes, the two sat down, still holding hands, beginning to share the stories of the years they had spent apart. Eliza talked about her life, her achievements, and the difficulties, while Margaret listened attentively, expressing her pride and sometimes her sadness at having missed so many moments. Richard, seeing that mother and daughter were comfortably engaged in their conversation, decided it was time to discreetly withdraw. "I'll leave you two alone," he said, drawing their attention for a moment. "I'm on the phone if you need anything." "Richard, thank you for everything," Eliza said, her gratitude evident in her look and voice. "Yes, Richard, thank you for bringing us together," Margaret added, with deep sincerity. As he left, Richard felt lighter, knowing he had done something truly good, something that transcended the usual scope of his daily activities. The way back to the office was filled with reflections on human relations, the fragility of memory, and the strength of family bonds. Upon arriving at his office, Richard reflected on the changes in his life and career that this experience had prompted. He knew that today's reunion was not just a closure for Eliza and Margaret. After the thrilling reunion between Eliza and Margaret, Richard felt a palpable shift in his worldview. Motivated by the impact he had witnessed and driven by a new understanding of the importance of community, he began visiting the community center more frequently, a practice that quickly became a part of his weekly routine. Each visit to the center revealed a different layer of the community that he had long neglected. Initially, Richard felt like a stranger in an unfamiliar world, but with each interaction, each conversation, he found himself becoming more involved and interested in the stories and lives of the people who frequented the place. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Richard was sitting at one of the tables in the center, attending an art class that Margaret loved to participate in. As he watched the participants, his attention was captured by an elderly man whose trembling hands struggled to mold clay into a vase. "May I help?" Richard offered, approaching with a gentle smile. The man looked up at him with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Ah, that would be wonderful, young man. These hands aren't what they used to be," he replied, passing the clay to Richard. As they worked together on the piece, the man, named Harold, began to share stories of his youth, his travels, and his family. Each story was a reminder of the many rich and varied lives that made up this community, lives that Richard would have ignored if not for his new perspective. "You know, Richard, each person here has a story to tell. Everyone is like a book waiting to be read," Harold commented, his eyes gleaming with wisdom. Richard nodded, deeply moved by the analogy. "I'm beginning to see that, Harold, and I'm grateful for every story I have the honor to hear." Weeks turned into months, and Richard continued to engage more deeply with the community. He initiated a program at the center that connected young entrepreneurs with elderly people, promoting an exchange of knowledge and experience that benefited both sides. Each project, each event he helped organize, not only brought tangible benefits to the center but also enriched his own life, bringing him a satisfaction he rarely found in his business transactions. This new perspective also began to influence his business decisions. Richard started integrating more ethical and sustainable practices into his company, inspired by the principles of responsibility and care he had learned at the community center. He knew that each small change contributed to a very different legacy than the one he had imagined for himself in the past. As he continued his journey of discovery and involvement, Richard began to truly understand the impact that one person could have on the lives of many. With Margaret and Eliza now often by his side, he had not only found a new purpose but also a new family in that vibrant community. The months passed, and the influence of Margaret and Eliza on Richard became increasingly evident. His regular interaction with them and with the community center had deeply enriched his perspective, leading to a personal and professional transformation that was beginning to be noticed by everyone around him. On a typical afternoon in the office, Richard called a meeting with his managers and department heads. The conference room, once the stage for discussions strictly focused on profits and efficiency, now had a slightly different atmosphere. Richard began the meeting not with numbers, but with a reflection. "I want to start with a simple question," Richard said, looking around the table. "What do we truly value as a company? And I'm not talking about profits or market share. I'm talking about our fundamental values, our mission." The attendees exchanged looks, somewhat surprised by the departure from the usual. Clara, one of the senior managers, spoke up. "Well, we've always focused on being competitive and innovative, but I think we've never really discussed values in a more human way." "Exactly," Richard agreed, nodding. And that's where I want us to start making some changes. I want our company to lead not just in innovation and efficiency, but also in social responsibility and empathy. Let's think about how our decisions affect not just our bottom line, but our employees, our customers, and our community. This new approach stemmed from his experiences at the community center, where Richard saw the positive impact that attention and care can have on people. He discussed ideas for employee wellness programs, environmental sustainability initiatives, and partnerships with local organizations for volunteer programs. "Richard, this is different from what we're used to, but it's refreshing," commented Tom, the operations director, a slight smile on his face. "It seems like you're really changing our company's culture." "I'm trying," Richard admitted, "and I hope all of you will help me in this process. I believe we can be leaders not just in our industry but also in how we treat people and our planet." In the following months, the changes became more tangible. Employees began to notice not just the new policies and programs but also the change in Richard himself. He was more present, more attentive to the needs and concerns of his team, and more open to feedback. Weekly team meetings, which used to be tense and rushed, now often included moments to discuss well-being and creativity. Richard made it a point to personally attend these sessions, encouraging everyone to share their ideas and concerns. One day, as he walked through the company's corridors, Richard stopped to talk with some of the customer service team members, listening intently as they shared their experiences. This type of direct interaction was something that rarely happened before. "Thank you for sharing that with me," Richard said after a lengthy discussion on how to improve customer service. "Every little detail is important. You are the voice of our company, and I want everyone to feel they have the support needed to do their best work." As these changes took root, Richard realized that his journey of transformation was just beginning. He knew that every decision and action was a step toward creating a company that truly reflected the values he now prioritized. And with this new philosophy, he was ready to face future challenges, not just as a businessman but as a truly compassionate leader. As Richard implemented changes in his professional and personal life, his relationship with Eliza also evolved significantly. The frequent visits to the community center and involvement in various activities that Margaret and Eliza adored became more than just appointments on Richard's schedule. They were opportunities to create memories with Eliza, strengthening the bond that had begun to form between them. One autumn afternoon, as they walked together after a painting session at the center, Eliza stopped to admire a series of photographs that depicted different moments in the community. Richard watched her, noticing how the soft light of the evening sun illuminated her face, reflecting the passion she felt for those captured moments. "You have an incredible eye for beauty in simple things," Richard commented, moving closer to view the photographs more closely. Eliza smiled, a soft blush appearing on her cheeks. "I think I've learned to see the world differently. Part of that was thanks to you," she said, giving Richard a meaningful look. Richard felt his heart quicken slightly at her words. "And I've discovered so much about myself, about life, because of you, Eliza. You've shown me a different side of the world, one that I completely ignored before I met you." Walking back to the car, they continued the conversation, discussing plans for future community projects, but also sharing small personal details of their lives. It was evident that each conversation brought them closer, weaving a web of intimacy and mutual understanding. A few weeks later, Richard and Eliza decided to spend a weekend away from the city. The retreat to a cabin in the mountains was a welcome break from their daily routine and a chance for them to connect even more deeply. During this secluded time, surrounded by the tranquility of nature, Richard found himself reflecting on the depth of his feelings for Eliza. Sitting in front of a crackling fireplace, with glasses of wine in hand, Richard found the courage to verbalize his feelings. "Eliza, I've never felt this way before. You've changed me, for the better. I love how you see the world, and I love how you make me want to be a better part of it." Eliza set her glass aside, her eyes shining with emotion and warmth. "Richard, I feel the same way. There's something very special between us, and I am so grateful for every moment we've shared. I love you." Hearing those words, Richard felt as if a new chapter was beginning in his life, not just in terms of personal and professional transformation, but also in the realm of true love. They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, making plans and dreaming together, each word and each gesture reaffirming the strong bond that had grown between them. As the weekend came to an end, and they returned to the routine of the city, Richard knew that his life would never be the same again. His love for Eliza had fully blossomed, becoming a fundamental pillar of his existence, inspiring him to continue his journey of growth and giving him the strength to face future challenges. The joy and tranquility that Richard and Eliza had cultivated in their relationship were suddenly overshadowed when Margaret's health began to decline. What initially appeared to be sporadic episodes of confusion became a more frequent and concerning deterioration of her condition, leading Richard and Eliza to confront challenges they had not expected to face so soon. On a cloudy Tuesday morning, Richard received a call from Eliza while he was at the office. Her voice was tense, marked by an urgency that made his heart sink. "Richard, we need to take Mom to the doctor today. She barely recognized where she was this morning, and she was saying things that didn't make sense." Richard felt a knot form in his stomach. "I'm on my way," he responded quickly, setting aside all his appointments for the day. Arriving at Eliza's house, he found Margaret sitting on the couch, looking disoriented at a photo album. Eliza was by her side, holding her hand, trying to offer some comfort. Richard approached, sitting on the other side of Margaret and offering a reassuring smile.
Margaret,
"How are you feeling?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Margaret looked at him with a flicker of recognition.
"Oh,
"Richard, I don't know. Things are all jumbled up here," she said, touching her own head with a frustrated expression. "Let's see if the doctor can help us understand what's happening, okay?" Eliza suggested, her voice steady despite the evident stress. At the doctor's office, the diagnosis was a hard blow. Margaret was progressing to a more advanced stage of Alzheimer's. The doctor discussed treatment options and care, but the words sounded distant to Richard and Eliza, who exchanged worried glances. On the way back home, the silence in the car was heavy, each lost in their thoughts about what the future held. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "Eliza, whatever happens, I'm here. We'll get through this together." Eliza held Richard's hand, squeezing it gently. "I know, and I can't imagine going through this without you. We'll find the best way to take care of her, together." In the days and weeks that followed, Richard and Eliza adjusted to a new routine, coordinating caregivers, medical visits, and adapting the home to ensure Margaret's safety and comfort. This shared caregiving experience not only brought them closer, but also taught them about resilience, patience, and the deep strength of familial love. As they adapted to this new reality, Richard found a pillar of strength in Eliza, and vice versa. Together, they faced each day with determination, supporting each other and finding small moments of joy and gratitude, even amidst the difficulties. This period of trials reinforced their commitment to each other, demonstrating that their love could endure not just through happiness but also through the most challenging times. Richard's decision to confront his past behaviors was not driven solely by a sense of guilt, but also by a sincere desire for change and reconciliation. He knew that to move forward and live according to the new values he had adopted, he needed to make amends with those he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of success. One of Richard's first steps was to revisit old professional rivalries. One such rivalry was with Michael, a former business partner with whom Richard had severed ties acrimoniously years ago. Determined to right this wrong, Richard arranged a meeting with Michael at a quiet cafe, away from the corporate hustle. "Michael, thank you for agreeing to meet with me today," Richard began, extending his hand in a gesture of peace. Michael, with a cautious expression, accepted the handshake.
I'm curious, Richard.
It's not every day that an old rival asks to meet. I know we didn't end things on the best terms, admitted Richard, looking Michael directly in the eyes. And part of that was my fault. I was so focused on winning, on being the best, that I forgot how important it is to maintain good relationships, even in business. I'd like to apologize for that. Michael appeared surprised. but after a moment, a slight smile formed on his face. "That's quite unexpected, Richard. I appreciate your honesty. I also have my share of the blame. Perhaps we could have handled things differently." The conversation that followed was frank and open, allowing both to share their perspectives and, eventually, find common ground. By the end of the meeting, a new mutual respect had been established, and both agreed to keep in touch, perhaps even exploring future collaborative opportunities. Inspired by the positivity of this experience, Richard sought out other individuals he felt he had wronged in the past. This included former colleagues, minor business partners, and even past employees. In each case, he made an effort to listen, understand, and, when necessary, offer restitution. This journey was not just about making apologies, but also about hearing the stories of those he had impacted, learning from their experiences. Each encounter left Richard a little more humble and much more aware of the kind of person and leader he wanted to be. These reconciliations began to transform the culture of his own company. Richard implemented new policies that promoted transparency, mutual respect, and support, encouraging his employees to speak openly and contribute their insights. Over time, the internal and external changes in Richard solidified, and he found himself truly at peace with the path he had chosen. Each step in his journey of reconciliation reinforced his resolve to live a life that not only sought success but also cultivated kindness and integrity. As Richard continued to mend old bridges and build new ones, he also began to understand that true leadership involves not just leading but also listening and growing together with those around him. The transformation that had started with small steps was now reflected in every aspect of his life, preparing him for the new challenges that still lay ahead. After months of personal reconciliation and professional transformation, Richard felt compelled to expand his impact, deeply inspired by the legacy of kindness and community commitment that Margaret had cultivated throughout her life. Determined to do more for the community that had welcomed and taught him so much, Richard began planning and implementing a series of community projects. The first of these projects was the establishment of a scholarship program for young people from the neighborhood where the community center was located. "We want to give these young people the opportunities they deserve, to grow, learn, and eventually lead," Richard explained during the launch meeting of the program, which was attended by community leaders, educators, and enthusiastic families. "This is amazing, Richard," said Eliza, holding his hand during the event. "Seeing you carry forward the kind of work my mother always valued. It means a lot to me, to all of us." Encouraged by the initial success and positive reception from the community, Richard didn't stop there. He invested in a project to revitalize local parks, collaborating with the city council and other businesses to transform neglected urban spaces into vibrant and safe green areas for families and children. During a visit to one of these newly renovated parks, Richard talked to a mother who was watching her children play. "You don't know how much this means to us," she shared with him, a grateful smile lighting up her face. "Having a safe and beautiful place like this to bring my kids is more than I could ask for." Richard felt a wave of satisfaction upon hearing these words. "I'm so glad you all are enjoying the space. Plans like this are just the beginning," he responded, committed to the idea that each successful project was a step toward a more united and healthy community. Additionally, he launched initiatives to support local small entrepreneurs, providing resources, training, and access to markets that were previously inaccessible. Richard often organized fairs and events at the community center, where these new business owners could sell their products and services, gaining visibility and crucial support for the growth of their businesses. "Richard, your help has been essential," confessed a young entrepreneur during one of these events. "You're not just transforming the park or the school, you're transforming lives." Each project, each event that Richard initiated and supported, reinforced his commitment to the well-being of the community. He was creating a cycle of generosity and progress that benefited everyone involved and promoted a sense of belonging and pride in the community. As these projects came to life and grew, Richard's satisfaction only increased. He found in community engagement not just a way to honor Margaret's legacy but also a renewed purpose in his own life, one that transcended business successes and touched the foundations of true personal and collective fulfillment. As autumn unfolded into a tapestry of vibrant colors, Richard felt it was the perfect moment to take a new step in his relationship with Eliza. He wanted the proposal to reflect the deep love and respect he had for her, something that also echoed their commitment to the community and mutual care. For the big moment, Richard chose a small community garden that both had helped revitalize. It was a place that symbolized renewal and growth, values they shared and wanted to perpetuate. He arranged everything with utmost discretion, wishing to maintain the simplicity and intimacy of the event, focusing solely on the significance of the occasion. At dusk, under a sky painted in shades of orange and pink, Richard led Eliza to the garden, pretending they needed to discuss some plans for future community projects. As they arrived, Eliza noticed something was different. Paper lanterns subtly illuminated the path and soft music played in the background, creating a magical atmosphere. "Richard, what's happening?" Eliza asked, a smiling suspicion forming on her lips. "Eliza, since we met, my life has changed in ways I never imagined," Richard began, holding her hands in his. "You taught me the true meaning of community and care. With you, I've learned to love not just the person you are, but also the world around us." Eliza listened, her eyes glistening with emotion. Richard knelt down, pulling a small box from his coat pocket. "Eliza, will you marry me and continue building this incredible life together, expanding our family and our community?" Tears of happiness streamed down Eliza's face as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, Richard, yes." Soft applause came from the shadows, where friends and family who had gathered secretly emerged, sharing in the joyful moment. The evening was filled with celebrations, laughter, and many discussions about the future. In the days and weeks that followed, Richard and Eliza began planning their wedding and life together with renewed enthusiasm. They wanted their wedding to be a celebration not only of their love but also of the principles that brought them together: inclusion, kindness, and community support. They planned a simple yet meaningful ceremony in the same garden where Richard had proposed, wishing for the location to continue being a symbol of growth and beauty in their lives. Moreover, they discussed ways to use the wedding as a platform to support various community causes, including donations instead of wedding gifts and direct involvement of guests in community activities during the event. Each detail was carefully considered to reflect their values and the life they intended to build together. As each plan took shape, Richard and Eliza felt grateful and thrilled to have each other and to be able to share their commitment not just with each other but with the broader world around them. After the thrilling proposal, Richard and Eliza were eager to celebrate their engagement in a way that deeply reflected the values both shared. They decided there was no better place for this celebration than the community center, a space that had become a symbol of their union and Margaret's legacy. They planned the event not just as an engagement party but also as a tribute to the life and impact of Margaret, who was now in a quieter phase of her life, proudly observing the changes her daughter and Richard were promoting. On the day of the event, the community center was decorated with colorful flowers and photographs of Margaret over the years, each capturing moments of her involvement with the community and her family. Soft music played in the background, while guests of all ages began to arrive, each bringing an energy of joy and anticipation. "It's wonderful to see how everyone came to celebrate, not just our engagement but also everything my mother has done for us," Eliza shared with Richard as they greeted guests at the entrance. Richard, holding Eliza's hand, smiled in response. "Yes, and it's a testament to the love and respect everyone has for your mother and now, for us. Today is truly a celebration of all she represents." As the celebration progressed, friends and family took turns at the microphone, sharing stories and anecdotes about Margaret. A longtime friend recalled how Margaret had helped her during a difficult time. "There wasn't a single time I sought help and Margaret wasn't there," with her welcoming smile and wise words. "She taught many of us here about the strength of kindness." Richard also had the opportunity to speak. In front of all the guests, he expressed his gratitude. "Margaret, you are the true foundation of this community and the inspiration for the journey that Eliza and I are undertaking together. Thank you for teaching us the true meaning of community and care." As night fell, the event turned into a lively dance, with songs that were Margaret's favorites over the years. The energy was contagious, with young and old dancing together, symbolizing the union of generations, one of the many lessons Margaret had instilled in everyone. Amidst laughter and dance steps, Richard and Eliza felt deeply connected not only to each other but to everyone around. They had created a moment of genuine joy and community, honoring the past while looking forward to the future. As the celebration came to an end, Richard and Eliza took a moment to themselves, watching the last guests depart. "Today was amazing, Eliza. It feels like everything is aligning perfectly for us," Richard commented, a glow of happiness in his eyes. Eliza, leaning on his shoulder, nodded. "Yes, and to think it all started with small steps. Small acts of love and care." With the night ending under a starry sky, they knew that each choice made, each action taken, was weaving the fabric of their lives together, strengthened by the love and the community that surrounded them. They were ready to face the future, no matter the challenges that might arise, because they knew they had each other and an entire community at their side. After the vibrant and heartfelt celebration at the community center, Richard and Eliza, now closer than ever, dedicated themselves to the final preparations for their wedding. They wanted their special day to reflect the transformations they had experienced individually and as a couple, celebrating not just their love, but also the community that had been so pivotal in their lives. On a quiet morning, as they walked together through the garden that had been the stage for their proposal, they discussed the details of the wedding. "I want our wedding to be a reflection of everything we value," Eliza said, holding Richard's hand as they watched the flowers blooming around them. "I completely agree," Richard responded, his gaze contemplative. "Let's include not just our family and friends, but also the many people from the community who have supported us. It will be a celebration of all we have achieved together and what we still aspire to accomplish." They planned a simple yet profoundly meaningful ceremony in the same community garden where Richard had proposed. They decided that instead of traditional gifts, they would ask guests to contribute to a fund dedicated to supporting local educational and health projects, perpetuating the legacy of care that Margaret had so lovingly cultivated. During a meeting with the wedding planning team, Richard expressed his desire to involve the youth from the community center. "I'd like the children who participate in the center's programs to play a special role on the day. Maybe they can be part of the ceremony or help in some way during the event," he suggested. "That would be wonderful," Eliza agreed, excited about the idea. "They are part of our journey. It would be beautiful to have them with us, celebrating." As plans materialized, Richard reflected on the journey he had traveled. From a businessman focused solely on financial success, he had transformed into a community leader who valued compassion and active engagement in the well-being of others. Margaret, even in her moments of fragility, continued to be a daily inspiration for him. One afternoon, while reviewing some final details for the wedding, Richard shared a reflection with Eliza. "You know, I never imagined my life would change so much since we met. You, the community, everything we've learned together about caring for others. It's more than I ever dreamed for myself." Eliza smiled, squeezing his hand. "And I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. With you by my side, I know any challenge we face will just be another opportunity for us to grow together." As Richard and Eliza's story comes to a close, they look to the future with optimism and determination, ready to continue building a life together founded on love, inclusion, and mutual support. Their wedding would not just be a celebration of their union, but a testimony to a life dedicated to spreading kindness and compassion, a true homage to Margaret's legacy and the enduring impact she had on their lives.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.